Welcome. Thank you all so much for participating in that short activity. So today we'll be discussing why junior year is so important and three things that you should be thinking about now to help strengthen your college application. So a quick workshop overview. We just finished the workshop. I am your facilitator. My name is Angela. I work with your coaches, who are the people who text you and ask for updates every now and then. I'm one of the people who coordinate and help out with these workshops and presenting them. We also have the moderator who will be in the chat. They'll be responding to comments. They'll be sending links into the chat. Sorry if my background is kind of noisy. They'll be responding to your texts and messages. And that is Adeline today. So the overall goal for today is to talk about some things that we can do now during junior year to help out with strengthening your college application. So some of these things will be extracurriculars, recommendation letters, the SAT and ACT, whether to take it or not, and if so, which one to take. And we'll end off with some goal setting and questions if you have any. But also feel free to ask them about the workshop if you have them. So quick little in-depth about me. My name is Angela. I am a second year studying at Barnard College, Columbia University. I am studying biochemistry with a minor in women's gender sexuality studies. Always a long one to mention. And I am on the pre-dental track, which pretty much aligns with basically all of the other pre-health tracks. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out and I will most likely be able to help you with that. I am from Staten Island, New York. I am first generation low income. And because of that, I was applying to a bunch of scholarships during high school. And I am lucky enough to be a Dell and National Science Foundation scholarship recipient. So if you have questions about scholarships, which I did when I was in high school, so if you have any, feel free to reach out and I'm definitely down to help. And lastly, I was also a Let's Get Ready student and mentee. So definitely use this resource, use your coaches, use me. It's a great resource and offers a lot of help and guidance, free guidance. So definitely worth it to stick around and attend these workshops. Lastly, I will put my email into the chat in case any of you are interested in host I offered one-on-ones, so if you guys are interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. With that, so we have a $10 mini raffle today for turning your cameras on. So feel free to do that. It's $10 and it's just today. Last workshop, no one turned on their cameras. So if you are the only one turning on your cameras, you're basically going to get the $10. So feel free to do that. But we also have a prize raffle at the end of the year that you can join by attending the workshops. And there will be three winners for that, with the grand prize, the largest prize being $100. So those winners will be announced at the end of the year. We will discuss why junior year is so important and what college admission officers are generally looking for when they are reviewing your profiles. Um, so generally speaking, most people say that junior year is the most important year in the context of college applications. Um, and I am curious to see if any of you guys find this statement surprising or if it is your first time hearing this. And if it is, feel free to raise your Zoom hand so I could get a kind of feel of what kind of crowd we have. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands, which is great. That means that you guys have been given a heads up about this. But if not, that's okay too. It just depends on who you're talking with typically. But the reason as to why junior year is generally said to be the most important year is because of a multitude of reasons. But the main idea is that junior year is the sweet spot where you're starting to think about college, but you also still have a good amount of time before you apply to college. So you have enough time to think about things like building relationships with your recommenders, taking or retaking the SAT or the ACT, and also adding extracurriculars. So those are some of the things that we are going to be talking about today that you can get started with now. But there are also things like grades. So when you are applying to college during your senior year, you will most likely not have your senior year grades back yet, for you to submit to colleges. So if you think about it, junior year grades are the most recent grades that your college admission teams will have access to, um, which makes your junior year grades very important. Furthermore, even if you did like not so hot during your freshman or sophomore year, doing well in your junior year could show like an upward trajectory, which is a really good sign in college applications. And even if you did well in your freshman or junior year or both, continuing to do well in your junior year will be a good sign to college admission officers as well. Welcome, Winnie. Okay. I will ask for a volunteer to read the slide for me. It is a quote. Raise your Zoom hand if you would like to volunteer for that. Sarah.
Junior year is a great time to reflect on what you want for yourself in a college experience and to decide what aspects of who you are and your story you want to share with admission teams.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. So, your junior year, you want to reflect on, like what we mentioned in our last workshop, school fit. So you will want to think about what you want to get out of college, whether that be in the social scene or academically speaking. But also you want to start to now think about um, your story that you want to tell to admission teams. And generally speaking, when people say story or like storytelling in the context of college applications, you might think of, oh, that's just the personal statement. But in reality, this story actually encompasses a lot more things than just your general essay. Usually, your extracurriculars tell a specific story to your those specific. Ooh, hopefully my internet. Let me know if it is. But um, I okay. Lost my train of thought. So, your story will encompass a lot of parts of your application, and those are the here. I see a question from a student. Can you wait to submit your application after the first semester of 12th grade? Um, I think that is something that I might have to reach back out to you with because I don't have an exact answer, but I think generally it also depends on the school. So if it is later than the typical like timeline of submitting your application, then you might be actually going into that school as like a transfer for 12th grade grades. I don't think so, but you could send me an email and I will jot that down so I could get back to you about that. But that's a good question. I will I will be back in touch with you for that. But that's a good question. And I will send you an email to follow up. All right. So, what do college admission teams generally care about? Um, we want to consider what they tend to value so that you guys could like go to college and like get into these colleges. But generally speaking, even though obviously your grades and test scores are going to be a huge, like factor in this consideration, they will also consider a lot things like leadership, responsibility, awards, recognitions, involvement, and character. So with character, things like volunteering, taking care of younger siblings, those show like kindness, integrity, determination. So, while involvement could be things like being a part of your student organization at school, or being a part of a club. So these are just some things that college admission teams are going to look out for because they want a well-rounded student and a student that would be able to add to their college campus, kind of add color to their student diversity group as well. So a few helpful reminders because I know that this all could be kind of overwhelming as well. You don't have to be everything that these college admission teams are looking for, but instead of thinking of it as like your college application being this long to-do list or like having certain oh my God, check boxes that you need to check out, you should think about your college application as showing, again, a story of yourself and having highlighting certain parts of your character that you want these college admission officers to see. So obviously that does not encompass or imply that you have to have everything that they could possibly want from you. It's more so quality over quantity. So focus on what you're into and interested in and just focus on those and you will be good to go for your college application. Secondly, don't panic because you are still a junior and that is why we're holding this workshop. So you have enough time to build your application and make a good impression on make a good impression of your application. And also, there are colleges for everyone, and a college someone else considers as good might not be the same for you. Again, with our workshop from last time, you have to start thinking about college fit, and there will be a college for everyone. And lastly, no matter where you go, your degree will hold a value. And no matter what, at the end of the day, an education is a privilege and knowledge is always going to be power. So keep those reminders in mind as you are going through this probably very stressful period of college applications. So, three things to leverage now. If you focus on these three things this year, it will help you strengthen your profile and decrease your stress next year when you're actually applying to college. So the three things are extracurriculars, recommendations, the SAT, ACT, and the SAT/ACT is starred because the requirements for this are constantly evolving, as you probably all know. So there are some special considerations that we will talk about. We'll also talk about how you can make the decision of whether or not to take the SAT or ACT. So, section number one will be about extracurriculars. And as we already talked about, junior year is really the last opportunity to add to your extracurriculars. And we'll now discuss about if and how you might want to do that in your junior year and in this section. What might count as an extracurricular? Um, I would like you all to either chat it in or come off mute with examples that could be an extracurricular that you can add to your college application. And keep in mind that there is a large range of extracurriculars. So feel free to chat that in. We'll take a few minutes for that. So I see someone said an activity done outside of school. Um, that's a great one. Sorry. Is someone Sarah?
Um, oh, why is this? Um, ex, yeah. An curricular I'm doing this year is ceramics, which is new to me, but it's pretty fun.
Oh, that's great. It shows a hobby, and that's really good to show in your extracurriculars. And I could tell that it's probably something that's kind of like less common, which is actually a really good thing. It will help you stand out. And so that's a great one. Thank you so much, Sarah. I also see someone say an activity done outside of school. So specific examples of that could be sports or passion projects. So that's a really good one as well. And Amandeep said clubs and community service. That's good. Robotics, writing publications, published writer. So someone said writing publications because you can say that you were a published writer. That is actually really good. We will talk about this more later on, but that's an example of deepening a part of your extracurricular with like a leadership thing or being able to show that you're taking initiative. Community service is a really good one. Student government. Yeah, so these are really good examples of extracurriculars. And I'm so glad that you guys have so many examples of these. But the ones that we have listed here are just some of them. You guys seem to have a really good idea of what extracurriculars are. All of the ones that you have mentioned are correct, and you can list as extracurriculars. So the ones that we have listed here are, as some of you guys mentioned, school clubs, sports, non-school affiliated activities. So someone mentioned activities done outside of school. Community service and activism is one as well. Work, family responsibilities, that's actually one that a lot of students forget about. So definitely if you dedicate a lot of time to family responsibilities, like taking care of a younger sibling, that's definitely something that you can put down as well. And personal projects and self-guided studies are also really great. There are bonus points for things like leadership, and long-term commitments, as well as taking initiatives. So someone mentioned again the publications thing. That's definitely an example of taking initiative and starting your own project. So those were really great examples. Thank you all so much for responding. So overall, your extracurriculars will help demonstrate that you are a well-rounded student, and that's kind of what we're shooting for. You should have been sent brag sheets from your coaches, and it's helpful to fill those out and the moderator has put that into the chat as well. It's helpful to fill those out because it helps you have everything in one place and for you to kind of like start editing your list of extracurriculars as time goes. Um, Also, when you are asking teachers for recommendation letters, a lot of the times they will ask for a brag sheet so they have more to talk about in regards to you as a student and a person outside of school. So definitely get started on those. And my advice for brag sheets are to when you're initially starting to create them, don't think too much about it, but rather just try to jot everything out at once. Um, the problem with thinking too much about your back sheets before you get started on them is you'll start considering too much about like the value of your extracurriculars when you should start to just jot everything down. You should focus on having everything down first, and then you could start editing that list later on. So definitely just take some time whenever you're free and jot down everything that you have done throughout high school on your back sheet, and you'll thank yourself for that later on. So there is no perfect formula of extracurriculars, but a general guide is that you should think about how you are demonstrating your interests, your passions, commitments, and overall impact outside of the classroom with your extracurriculars. So this can obviously be very intimidating to think about and approach, and it might not ever feel like you're doing enough extracurriculars. But remember that enough is not an actual number, but rather a thoughtful, like, reflection on your existing impact in your community. So don't think too much about quantity, but rather focus on quality and things that you actually care about. So, if you feel like you already have a lot of extracurriculars, you should consider if there are any extracurriculars or things that you want to go more deeply involved in and to get more deeply involved in. For example, you could take on a leadership role. But if that's like it's if that doesn't feel feasible, that's also okay because you don't have to do everything like I said before, you don't have to do everything that you feel like these college admission officers are looking for. So just focus on the things that you genuinely have interest in doing. But if things like taking on leadership roles or beginning your own projects sparks your interest, then definitely go for it. But also keep in mind that it's not going to be feasible to go deeper everywhere in your extracurriculars list, and you should only take on as much as it feels manageable while also balancing your own well-being. But on the other hand, I don't know what's going on with my voice. On the other hand, if you feel like you don't have a lot of extracurriculars, you can definitely consider adding one or two meaningful extracurriculars onto your list, but you shouldn't like do this or feel the need to do this simply to add extracurriculars, just to, like have them or to seem busier. But instead, you should choose where you think like you could demonstrate another passion that might be reflected, like that might not be reflected on your list right now. And the moderator, Adeline, has sent a list that has some ideas that could get you started thinking about some more extracurriculars if you're having trouble with that. And you can definitely spend some time scrolling through it to see the different categories of extracurriculars during your free time. So that link is in the chat for you all to reference to. And moving on to our next activity, we have two options. So option one is to identify an extracurricular where you can go deeper into, and option two is to brainstorm extracurriculars that you might want to add onto your list. So that's kind of like in accordance to what we just went through. If you feel like you already have a bunch, you might want to think about how you could take on, you know, deepen one of the extracurriculars on your list. But if you feel like you don't have enough, you might want to do option number two, where you brainstorm some more extracurriculars. So we will take a few minutes for that. And this is a personal activity, so feel free to just do it for your own like reference, and you definitely do not have to share if you don't want to. But whichever option you choose, you should consider things that represent who you are and what you want to share about yourself and your interests. Okay, so we'll have about 3 minutes for that. and we will have the break after this activity. So I think we will be right on time. So we'll have around 3 minutes for that. Feel free to ask any questions if you have them. So we will continue now. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay. We'll talk about recommendation letters, because most colleges and universities will ask students to have recommendation letters, and we'll also ask your college counselors to submit one as well. Your college counselor could be called guidance counselor or school counselor, but mine was called guidance counselor. Usually they will submit a recommendation letter or a letter for you as well. And we will be talking about what this process is and what it entails, and how you can get really strong recommendation letters as well. Okay, so we'll be jumping right in with another activity. So, who do you think can write you a recommendation letter? What are some examples of people who could write you a recommendation letter? Feel free to chat it in, unmute. And let me see if I could. Oops. And I will type in the answers here. So I am seeing teachers, club advisors. Those are good. Club advisors usually are teachers, so I'm going to put that into one. High school teachers, yes. My school recommends humanities teachers. We're a humanities school. Yeah, that's good too. Um, That's kind of specific to probably your school, but just teachers in general, obviously listen to what your school is recommending, but teachers in general are able to write you a recommendation letter. Typically, it doesn't have to be a humanities teacher. It could be a teacher of your choosing. Coaches, so I'm seeing mentors, teachers, coaches, and other significant figures in your life that are not a part of your family. And that's really good that you point that out because obviously you don't want to ask your family members for a recommendation letter since that would be, biased, and probably not as reliable as, let's say, a teacher's or a coach's. Mentors could be a Hmm. That might be also a little bit biased, but I think the main concern with mentors is that you would want your um you would want to try to keep your recommenders academic. So you want them to be able to speak about your academic performance. So as long as your mentor is, let's say your mentor is a teacher, then that would be okay. But things like coaches and sorry, let me continue presenting. Mm, okay. So things like teachers, and not things, people like teachers and guidance counselors or college counselors, they are typically the most like standard recommender or recommendation writers, just because they're able to talk more about your academic performance. And if you have a good relationship with them outside of the classroom, they could also talk about your personality. But coaches and like employers, while you can, while you can ask them for a recommendation letter, they are considered secondary um letters because they're not academic, because your coaches don't really like see how you're working in class. But you could definitely, especially if you have a close relationship with your coaches and like let's say employers or mentors, um they could be a good resource as well. But with things like mentors, I'm kind of hesitant with saying yes to because let's say like let's get ready coaches, if they're like your mentors, that might not be a great one because they haven't known you for that long, and also they're more of a peer. So things like that. If you have more questions with that, feel free to, reach out to your Let's Get Ready coach and they would be able to give you an answer as well. With that, I'm seeing a question. If it was a person you studied under in a lab over the summer, would that work as a mentor for a good letter of recommendation writer? I think that would be a good recommender. Um, Especially if you're interested in working with like in working in the STEM fields because you mentioned that you worked in a lab, but that is definitely also something that is that's considered a secondary letter just because they're not a teacher or a guidance counselor. But if you have a good relationship with them, that is definitely a good resource as well and a good recommendation letter as well. And typically I think when I applied to college, they asked for two recommendation letters. So, um, how I went about it was I had a coach write me a recommendation letter and then a teacher write a recommendation letter. So I kind of got the primary and the secondary recommendation letters. So that is also another way that you could go about this. But for the sake of time, we will move on. Um, those were great answers that you guys put in. And again, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll be able to help with your specific situations. Let's see. And then the other activity is the Padlet. I will put um, Adeline, if you could put the link to the Padlet in the chat. You could also, thank you. You could also put scan the QR code and you should be able to access the Padlet in that way. But the prompt will be what connections both in and outside of the classroom might make a teacher excited to write recommendation letters for a student? Yeah, okay. So I'm seeing a lot of answers related to like knowing a teacher outside of the classroom, which is always a great sign. Typically speaking, that is like what you would want. That's like the standard of like if you know a teacher outside of the classroom, that's a really good sign of being able to ask for a solid recommendation letter. Um, so reaching out for help and in general being interested in what the teacher is um talking about and teaching is a really good way to like, as long as you're engaging in class, that's always a good sign. And like not showing that you're bored in class or like sleeping in class. Obviously, teachers for those might not be t the best recommendation letters. Um, Knowing a teacher outside of the classroom, but also maybe a leader of a club. Yeah, so club advisors are typically teachers. At least for my high school, it worked that way. So if you have a club and one of your teachers is the advisor for that club, that's also another example of the teacher knowing you outside of the classroom and being able to tell stories about you as um, a whole person and not just a student in class. Attending office hours, study sessions, significant effort to be interested in their class. It's great. Academic performance, putting effort into their class, engaging a lot with them. Yes, so those are great answers. Just being able to engage with the teacher whenever you can, and having the goal is for the teacher to be able to have a story to tell about you. So obviously, if you're not very engaged with them, or if you're not really paying attention in class, they might not have too much to talk about when it comes down to writing a recommendation letter. So those are great examples um, of of teachers that would make a good recommendation letter. Okay, so thank you all so much for participating in that. And to summarize, you'll just want to figure out some teachers and potentially coaches or advisors who could write recommendation letters for you and cultivate these relationships by making a good impression and doing the things that will make them excited to write this letter for you, which I think you guys did a great job at describing the possible situations that would make that true. So, a what's what of recommendation letters. So you should be getting a tip sheet with in-depth information about asking for recommendation letters later on in this year from your coaches. But if you're interested, the moderator could also drop it into the chat right now. But in general, what to look for in a recommender, as we said, is thank you, Adley, is a teacher with that you're engaging with constantly that has stories to tell about you. And normally it is recommended that you ask a teacher if you know what kind of major you want or field of study that you want to pursue in college. It is recommended that you ask a teacher in that subject. But if not, and it's not expected that you know your major right now, if not, that's totally okay. And asking teachers of different subjects for your recommendation letters can also help show that you're a well-rounded student. Some questions to think about are, do your recommenders have anecdotes, stories to tell about you? And have I shared my academic or professional interests with them? So engaging with them in class, showing that you're interested in the things that they're teaching, or if not what they're teaching, what you are interested in outside of what they're teaching. So just in general, talking to them about your academic interests, is it always a good sign? And try to ask for these recommendation letters as soon as possible, just so you can save the stress for both you and your recommenders. Um, so now we'll start talking about the roles of your school counselor. So, as I mentioned, school counselors can sometimes be called college or guidance counselors, and some counselors will be really involved while others can be less so. Mine, my college counselor was in charge of 800 students, so she wasn't able to be very involved. Um, but in general, like that is a difference that will be there, and it just depends on your school. So it's okay if your teacher, your guidance counselor is not very involved. Their main goal and job is to contextualize your high school and your involvement in your high school to a college admissions committee. So this letter from your school counselor will be less about the personal aspects of your relationship with the counselor and more about your academic profile and the school's academics and the school's stats, basically. So the job of this school counselor letter will be different from the general teacher recommendation. Is my counselor's recommendation required? Yes, typically it is from most schools. Um, but usually it's not. If it is required, your counselor will just know to send it in because they're responsible to send in things like transcripts and other documents. But if you're unsure, you could always reach out to them and ask them just to double check. But generally, yes, it is required, and they will send it like on your behalf. Um, that's a great question. So the next section will be about the SAT and the ACT. We'll talk about like whether or not you would want to take the SAT and or the ACT, and if so, like which one you would want to do. And then after this section, we will close off with some goal setting and any further questions. I know I'm like kind of like breezing through these, but it's just for the sake of time. I don't want to keep you guys waiting after the 7:30 deadline. But if you want to stick around for questions, we will have time for that at the end. So there has been some changes for the SAT and the ACT over the school years, along with the policies that college have in regards to them. So a lot of colleges have now extended the test optional policies through 2026, while others have just been indefinitely test optional. Um, those are things that you would need to search up on Google in your own time, especially with like your list of colleges. So a college will either require the SAT/ACT. They could either be that or test optional, or they could be test blind. So test blind means that they just won't consider the SAT or ACT for anyone. Test optional means that um, they will give you a choice of whether or not you want to submit your SAT or your ACT score. So I applied to a lot of schools that were test optional, and although I took the SAT, I wasn't very happy with my grade, so I didn't submit it to a lot of the schools that I was applying to. So you definitely still have that choice, even if you took the SAT or the ACT when you apply to a school that's test optional. And obviously, if a school requires the test, you will just have to submit it regardless. Um, some updates to the tests specifically, the SAT and the ACT have been shortened. And the SAT is now about 2 hours with an entirely digital option, or no, not an option. They're just going to be completely digital. So while the SAT, I'm pretty sure it's going to be, they're going to have digital options at specific locations, while the SAT is just going to be completely digital. And along with that, we're going to talk about this more later on, but the ACT has a science section that the SAT does not, because the SAT is just reading, writing, and math. But we'll talk more about that later on. Okay. So, some questions that you would want to consider when you're asking yourself, should I take the SAT and or the ACT? We're going to have these questions in the next slides in more depth, but the first question will be, do the colleges I want to apply to require the test? Number two will be, how does my application compare to those who are typically accepted at those schools? Number three will be, do the scholarships at these schools or any other scholarships I want to apply to require the SAT or the ACT? And number four will be, if taking the SAT/ACT, which test is a better fit for me? So question number one will be, do the schools I want to apply to require the test? And the moderator will add a link of the test optional schools into the chat, which you could peruse through at your own time in case you want to, see the options for that. But the activity in this section will be to search up 3 to 4 of the schools that you're interested in and see what their test policies are. So whether they are test required, test optional, or test blind. And you want to know this because you want to see whether or not you need to take the SAT and or the ACT. And hopefully we have enough time for this activity. Adeline, let me know if we don't, but we'll take like 2 minutes. Um, and as you're looking through the colleges, feel free to type them into the chat as you're finding like, you know, I think a lot of the I think I don't want to say it if I'm not sure, but let's say like for example, don't quote me on this, but like MIT test optional for this year. So as you're finding out these colleges and their test policies, type them into the chat. Okay, so we have 2 minutes for this activity. And um okay, yeah. So feel free to type it in and we will move forward after that. This also kind of requires for you to have an idea of what kind of colleges you're interested in. So even if, if you don't have that list yet, maybe you could look through the test optional schools and like look into those during this time too. We might not have enough time for you all to share, but if that's the case, since I'm not seeing any answers pop up yet, just might not be enough time, feel free to do this activity during your own time. And it's just good to have on your radar about these schools just to like help you decide whether or not to take these tests. But just because I don't want to keep you guys over time, we will move on from this activity. Definitely do it if you have the free time to do it. It's good to have on hand. Oh, I see Sarah. The schools I looked at don't say much, but this year, Drexel University is test optional. That's really good. Thank you for typing that in. I didn't think that anyone would have enough time for that, for this activity. But yeah, Drexel University is test optional right now. That's really good. I applied to test optional schools because I was not confident in my test taking skills. Um, so yeah, if you guys are interested in Drexel, Sarah helped you all out with that. Thank you so much. Oh, what did I just do? Okay. So, moving on to question number two, we're going to consider how your application might compare to those who are typically accepted at the school. So, in order to do this, you would Google the average GPA of students accepted at XYZ school, to gauge, for example, how your GPA stands with the students accepted. But you could also look up, this might take a little bit more searching, but you could also look up like AP classes that AP or honors classes that students typically take that are accepted at that school. Um, and at selective colleges, major connected classes and honors or AP classes that demonstrate academic achievement plays a role for college admission teams. Like they consider those things more, but definitely don't take too much and risk your grades suffering if you know that like a certain topic is just isn't your strength. But it's a good thing to keep in the back of your head if you're applying to selective colleges, AP classes, and other honors classes are generally like looked into by these admission teams. So I think we have enough time for this activity. Have a question. If I have, oh, someone else said Columbia University is task optional. I was going to say that, but I didn't want to like sound dumb if I was wrong. But if any of you guys are interested in that, Columbia is also test optional. I see a question. If I have an SAT score that's anywhere from 50 to 100 points lower than the school average, but the school's common data set tells me that the standardized tests scores are important, should I submit my score? Um, hmm. And I'm assuming that this is a test optional school. I would say SATs. If I were in that situation myself, which I was when I was applying to colleges, I just opted not to submit my test score. And I think I was more on like oh yeah, me personally, I wouldn't, but that is definitely something that like it's not a huge like if you're 50 points lower than the school average, that's like not a huge deal in my perspective. And I think it wouldn't like hurt your chances of getting into a school that bad if you're just 50 points lower than the school average. But if you feel like it's just too low compared to the average accepted students and the school is test optional, me personally, I would just opt out of it. Um, Especially if your GPA is good. So I was able to do test optional and opt out of submitting my scores because I was confident in my GPA and the other aspects of my college application. And we'll talk more about this later, but actually, I think it's mentioned on this slide. If you don't submit your SAT or your ACT score, your things like your GPA, the difficulty of the classes that you're taking, your extracurriculars, those other aspects of your college application will weigh more simply because you don't have that SAT score as part of the equation. So if you're confident in the other aspects of your college application, I think it could be like you could consider not submitting your SAT score if you feel like it's too low. That's what I did, but definitely also like go around and ask different people for like second opinions. Um, I see someone researched about Purdue University, which has an average SAT score of between 1370 and 1510 with a average GPA of 3.6 to 4. That's really okay. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of direct messages. Okay. Yeah, so if you guys have any further questions, feel free to stay back into the end of the workshop and I'll hopefully be able to get to them. I just don't want to stay too far behind the time. But okay, thank you guys so much for those who put in the universities and their average scores. So definitely look into those, especially in like for your specific schools on your list. And it'll help you gauge like whether or not you want to take the SAT score because if your SAT score is tremendously lower than the accepted students, you might not want to submit it, or if it's higher, you might want to submit it to help boost your application as well. So thank you all so much for participating in that. We're just going to have to move on because I don't want to keep you guys over time. Um, Question number 3 will be, do the scholarships at the schools on my list or other scholarships I want to apply to require the SAT/ACT? So if these scholarships do require the SAT or the ACT, you would want to take it. Um, and I think the general advice is if you're applying to scholarships and you're really heavily relying on these scholarships for the financial support, which I had to go through myself, I think it would be a good idea to take the exam so you could broaden your choices and chances of getting one of these scholarships because it's really competitive usually to get scholarships and you don't want to limit your pool too much. So my general advice is to try to like broaden your pool as much as you can. And if that means taking the SAT or the ACT, I think it would be worth taking. So definitely Google search those and see what those scholarships on your lists are, like what their policies are with the SAT or the ACT are. Um, and finally, question number 4. Let me exit this out. Question number 4 is which test is a better fit? I kind of briefly went over this before, but the SAT only has the reading, writing, and math section, while the ACT has that additional science portion. So if you are more of a STEM person or are interested in studying science, you might want to consider the ACT to help boost your grade. Um, the length, they've both been shortened over time, but the ACT is about 3 hours and the SAT is about 2 hours. Um, and the SAT has no essay portion, while the ACT has an optional one. So again, if that's one of your strengths, you might want to consider that as well. Um, and in order to prepare for these exams, what I did, because I didn't want to pay that much for SAT tutoring, we have Let's Get Ready has a free SAT prep and tutoring program. So definitely check that out to help you study for the SAT, which usually the tutoring, like SAT tutoring, costs a lot of money. So the fact that this program offers it for free, definitely take advantage of that. But there's also self-studying options. Um, so Khan Academy is a great one. That's also one that I utilized a lot and a lot of my friends used. College Board also posts practice exams, and Ivy Global is another resource as well. And also, you can plan to take the SAT or the ACT more than once. There's something called the Super Score, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys are familiar with, but it basically combines your best scores of different exams into one and gives you like your best possible score. So if you take, that's the advantage of taking the SAT or the ACT more than once. We also give um, fee waivers. So if your guidance counselor hasn't given you a fee waiver, Let's Get Ready can help you get access to those as well. But basically, each student who is eligible for it, you're able to take the SAT twice for free. So if your guidance counselor doesn't have it for you or you didn't get it from them, you can reach out to Let's Get Ready and we'll be able to give you those as well. Mm. So key takeaways and things that you want to consider. Is test taking a strength of yours? If yes, then you should take it to strengthen your profile. And again, with the Google search of like the average accepted students, if your SAT score, let's say, is higher than the typical accepted students, you might want to submit that just so that you could strengthen your profile in that way. But if test taking just isn't a strength of yours, which it wasn't for me, um, you can look through schools that are test optional or test blind. Um, but if you want to take it, there are again resources for you to do that with. Um, okay, let's see. But there are schools, why do I keep saying it like that? There are schools that are test optional, so consider those if you don't want to submit your scores. And oh, this is a slide that mentions that like if you don't submit your SAT or your ACT scores, things like your GPA and extracurriculars, recommendation letters, they will just count more. So if your GPA is higher, let's say you have a 4.0 GPA and the average accepted student's GPA is like a 3.6, then maybe you wouldn't have to submit your SAT score or your ACT score. So those are just some things to again consider when you're asking yourself this question of like, do I take the SAT score, the SAT or the ACT? Um, so this kind of just reinstates what we were talking about. Should you take the SAT or the ACT? If the schools or scholarships you want to apply to require it, take it. Um, Especially with my ramble about these scholarships. If you want to broaden your chances of getting a scholarship, taking the SAT or ACT could be worth it. If it strengthens your application, good idea to take it. And if you're not sure in general, also a good idea to take it again with like broadening your pool of both schools and scholarships that you are able to apply to by taking the SAT or ACT. Okay, so we are now at the last section. I know I like sped through it, but I want to leave some time for questions at the end. We're going to move on to goal setting because we just talked about so much about what you can do this year, so we would want to set some goals for ourselves. You should have been you should have been sent out this like overview of like how to set goals from your Let's Get Ready coaches, but we generally use aims as a good standard of setting strong goals and realistic goals. So, A would be for attainable, an attainable goal being a realistic goal. So, it probably wouldn't be attainable, let's say, to say by next week, I'm going to have applied to all of the schools on my list, not attainable. So make sure that your goal is reasonable and attainable. Incremental, as in break your goal down step by step with deadlines for yourself and set specific, like, this will be on the next slide, I think. Yes. So you're going to want to set your goal, break it apart, and set deadlines for certain parts of your goal. Meaningful, so something that you genuinely care about, and specific, so that you know whether or not you have reached the goal when you have reached it. So, does anyone have any questions about what this means before we move on? Pretty straightforward, but okay. So our next activity is going to have to do with this. It will be goal setting. So what is something that you want to do to strengthen your profile or applications this week, this month, and this year? So I would like you all to write down one attainable, incremental, meaningful, and specific goal for each of the time periods above. So an example of this could be if I wanted to figure out my SAT and ACT situation throughout this year. So this week, I might want to decide, whether or not I want to take the SAT or the ACT. And then this month, I will choose whether or not I will choose which one to take. So I will choose either the SAT or the ACT. And then this year, I could have taken either the ACT or the SAT or the ACT. It gets confusing when you say it so many times, guys. So that is the next activity, and we will have a few minutes for that, 3 minutes. So you will have 3 minutes for that, and your Let's Get Ready coach will reach out to you to talk further more about this and help you clarify any of your goals if that is something that you would find helpful. But we'll take about 3 minutes for that, and I think we would be good on time for us to take some questions, which I think a lot of you guys do have. So we'll be back at around 7:23. Okay, I'm seeing a student say that they're going to work on their extracurriculars as one of their goals. So that's definitely one that is, something that we're all thinking about, and definitely a good example of, a goal that you would want to create. Um, Try to make it specific so that you know whether or not you have reached your goal by the end of it. I'm not getting any more messages, so let's see. Oh, someone said student government and community service. That's definitely something that you could work on in regards to like extracurriculars and a more specific goal. So thank you for sharing that. Um, okay. I'm going to move on for those of you who have extra questions. So we're going to close off with this workshop. So today we talked about some things that you should do in the coming weeks and months to begin getting ready for college applications. And taking these steps that we've discussed will help to strengthen your profile and likely result in you making a better impression on college applications and college admission teams. It will also ultimately help you decrease your stress next year when you go to actually fill out your applications, which is a very stressful time for a lot of students. So it's good that you kind of took this workload off of your plate of next year. Also, be sure to continue connecting with either me or your Let's Get Ready coaches about the goals that you have set and anything else related to these topics that we covered today that would be helpful to talk more about. But we would also really appreciate your feedback. We update these workshops based on what students shared with us last year, and the moderator has put the form into the chat as well, So please do fill that out. It really does help us out. And finally, I will take the questions that you all have now. But if you do not have any further questions, feel free to go. And I will also stay behind a bit until you all have asked. But yeah, other than that, feel free to go. Thank you guys so much for joining.